Team 1. Breach, breach, breach.
You're listening to Breach Your Mind. Hey guys, welcome back. It is the eve of Independence Day, so by the time most of you hear it, it will either be 4th of July or just after. So happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day. Today's show is going to be centered around something that I've got a little bit of experience in. And I say a little bit of experience because there's really only one big example that I've got, at least in my life. And I'm sure if I sat down and thought about it even harder, I could come up with, probably a couple more, maybe. And I know I'm not the only one that's dealt with it. It's something that probably more people go through it than actually realize it. And the topic is traumatic grief. This was a specific request, and so when I got the request, I had asked specifically what they were looking for, and it was grief, but it was grief revolving around a traumatic event, something that was sudden, and it caused them grief from it. Traumatic grief does differentiate from regular grief because there are different side effects from it. There are different issues that come along with it. The traumatic part is typically something that revolves around unexpected. Take, for instance, when my dad died. My dad died from cancer. It was a long fight for him. So when it happened, he was in hospice, and we knew it was coming. So it wasn't unexpected. Obviously it wasn't desired, but it was expected. So when he passed, obviously we grieved. I know I did. I was a little better prepared for it than, maybe some were. But that being the case, I did grieve. I miss my dad. Even now, I miss my dad. There's plenty of times I'd love to sit down and have some conversations with him about things that are going on. And, he grew up in a different time, and plenty of stuff that, I'd love to just have a conversation with him about. Just to see him again would be great. But the traumatic grief, unlike regular grief, like I was saying with my dad, comes from something that is sudden. The one example I've got from my life that is very profound, and any of you that have listened to the podcast before, you've heard me speak of it. And it revolves around the death of my mom. So Halloween night, my mom killed herself. Now, this is not recent. This is many years ago. But she killed herself. She committed suicide. And to me, suicide is bad enough in and of itself. In the job that I do, I'm exposed to it more often than not. And there's plenty of those individuals that I deal with that I've, had these conversations with on a couple of occasions. This isn't their first attempt, this isn't the first time that there's been the need for some kind of intervention. And because of that, their family is a little more prepared if that person actually does go through with it and is successful. They're at least a little more prepared for it. It's not saying they won't suffer, from traumatic grief from it. but they're at least a little more prepared for it. And that wasn't the case in mine. I don't remember how much detail I went into about the death of my mom. And I'm going to go into some detail with it now, but I would think that y'all would understand that there are some things that I probably won't share about it. It's not because it's some big secret, but it is something that is pretty intimate in my life, and it affects more than just me. All of the details of it, affect more than just me. So I'll kind of hit some of the details on it and get to the nitty gritty, but there will be some stuff that I will leave out. So just to kind of paint a picture for you about my mom. My mom was a little over 5 foot tall, so quite a bit shorter than me now. And for all sense of the word, she was classified by me and by many as a Renaissance woman. She'd do just about anything. I'd seen her work on cars. I'd seen her do construction work, especially with the home that she passed in. She helped to build it. Get out in the yard, do yard work, but at the same time, she was your typical Southern woman. When it was time for a gathering, a get-together, whatever, she'd clean up, she'd go put on a dress, she'd put on makeup, she'd do up her hair, and she looked like your traditional woman. So she was everything. And for me at the time, I joke about it, but it's nothing I'm ashamed of. I was definitely a mama's boy. She was my world. My mom and dad divorced when I was at a very young age. I don't even know what age I was when they divorced. I know by the time I was 3, they were definitely already divorced. So for the vast majority of the time, it was me, my mom, and one of my older brothers. And that was the world I knew. Mom had other guys come and go out of her lives, but no matter what, it was always me, my mom, and my brother. And the way the custody situation was set up was we went to my dad's house every other weekend, and typically, we'd spend a couple weeks out of the summer there. But the rest of the time, I was with my mom. And mom was a very caring person. She was, very big in expressing emotion, and making sure that you knew she cared about you. Even if you were somebody she just met, unless she got a bad vibe off of you, she made sure you knew she cared, and it was genuine. It was legitimately a genuine emotion from her. And there was no, we wait till private to share emotions. No, if she cared about you, she told you. It didn't matter where. She used to have this thing she would do as I was coming up as a kid, and even as I, got into my late teens and early 20s, she was still doing it. She would sit there and just kind of rub my earlobe. That was a thing for her. I used to joke around, that's why my ears are so big, is because she'd sit there and pull on them. But as you can tell, she was a huge part of my life. Made sure coming up that, I would never be dependent on anyone. Made sure I knew how to cook, knew how to clean, and at the same time tried to instill the chivalry in me, to be a gentleman, to treat women properly and things of that nature. And I mean, obviously I'm a little biased in it, but I think she did a pretty decent job at it. And she just, to me, was an all-around general happy person. I'd seen my mom upset over things, and Lord knows with me and my brother, she'd been plenty upset, just with, teenage boys and things like that. But she was a happy person. And as you know, I entered into adulthood, and I say adulthood meaning after 18. You know, I'd already gotten out of the Air Force, come back home, and when I got into that early adulthood there, you know, the conversations of suicide would come up, and Mama would always say that anyone that would commit suicide is a coward, that they chose the easy way out. And she never had anything positive to say about it, which was understandable coming from her, you know, the way she saw the world. And it was almost as if everything was in rose colored glasses. And that's how I saw the world. You know, everything, you know, yeah, bad things happen, but you know, there's no reason that you can't get past it and smile. So, you know, that was her view, and because that was her view, and that was how she raised me, that was my view. You know, if you committed suicide, you were a coward. And you know, we weren't raised to be cowards. So we had done trick-or-treating as a family the night before, and we'd gone out, and in our neighborhood we lived in, and my mom and my stepdad brought the golf cart over and hooked the trailer up to it, and we had the hay bales on it, and we rode around the subdivision, you know, letting the kids get off and go up and do trick-or-treating, and you know, all of us parents escorting the grandkids for them. And it was a good night. And once we got done, we got back to the house, and you know, they hooked the trailer back up to the truck, loaded the golf cart back on the trailer. And you know, my wife even remembers her and my mom having a conversation, you know, about, you know, how things were, you know, going to happen, you know, for next year, making plans for the next year, and making future plans on that night. And that was on the 30th. So fast forward to Halloween night, the 31st. Show's probably, you know, long been buried since then, but my wife and I at the time enjoyed watching a show called Dead Like Me. Goofy little show, but it was entertaining. And you know, we had some friends over, and we were getting ready to watch our show. You know, we didn't have DVRs, and TiVo was out, but we didn't have it. So we were, you know, legitimately, you know, there was no recording it and coming back. So we were getting ready to watch the show, and I'd gotten a phone call from Mama, and I noticed her voice sounded different, and she'd asked me about something that was going on. And you know, I told her, I said, well, no, I don't know, but I'll call and find out. Mind you, I'm not in my current profession at this time. I'm the way I look at it now, I'm still baby fresh, you know, smelling the Similac coming out from behind my ears. So I called to check on the thing that Mom had asked me to check on. And then I called her back and, you know, updated her, let her know what was going on, and everything was okay. And I could still hear that there was, you know, there's something wasn't right. You know, Mama didn't sound like Mama always sounded. She didn't sound as happy and as cheery. And you know, obviously, knowing my mama, I mean, legitimately, I spoke to my mom just about every single day. There were very few days that went by that I didn't speak to Mama, unless she went on a trip or, you know, something else. But it was very few and far between. So I noticed a difference in how my mom sounded, and you know, even went the route to asking her. You know, I was like, "Mom's, you okay?" And her words to me were, "Yes, son, I'm fine." And I think we may have talked for another minute or so, and then, you know, we said, "All right." She said, "All right, son, I'll talk to you later." I said, "Okay, Mama." I said, "I love you." She said, "I love you too," and hung up the phone. And I went and sat back down in the living room with my wife, and we started watching our show. everything seemed normal until it wasn't. So the phone rings, and my wife remembers this part a little better than I do. But, I believe she answered the phone, and she heard sobbing on the other end of the phone, and then the line went dead. And then the phone rings again, and I believe the way I've told the story and the way I remember it, and my wife can definitely correct me on it, but the way I remember it is I answered the phone, and when I answered, there was someone on the other end of the line and said, Mr. Strauss, this is so-and-so. We need you to come to your mom's house. There's been an accident. Obviously, I was immediately thinking the worst, but I wasn't thinking that something bad happened to my mom. There's no way. There's nothing that can happen to her. She's 10 foot tall and bulletproof in my eyes. But I kind of panicked a little bit. We get our stuff together, we get dressed, run outside, jump in the car. The wife wouldn't let me drive, which was smart. She wouldn't let me drive. She drove. We get out to the property. The gate to the property is stuck kind of in a halfway open. It was an automatic gate, but it was stuck in a halfway open, closed position, so we couldn't drive through it. And I remember before the car had even come to a stop, I threw my seatbelt off, jumped out the car, and just started sprinting up the rest of the way to the driveway, just as fast as I could get my body to go. And I run up the front steps of the house and onto the porch, and there was a deputy standing there blocking the door. And I remember a brief conversation, which I say it was a conversation. It wasn't so much as a conversation as it was me telling the deputy that he needed to get out of the way, that I needed to go see my mama. And he was very polite, and he said, "I'm sorry, I can't let you do that." And I said, I don't think you understand. I'm going in to see my mama. You need to get out of the way. This was pure emotion at this point. And again, he told me, he said, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't let you in." And of course, right after that, I hear I say, of course, it's not, of course, it doesn't happen to everybody, but we live in a small enough town. But I hear a familiar voice behind me say, "Brian." And I turn around, and it's a guy I went to high school with. He's the on-duty sergeant. And he says, "Hey, I didn't know you lived here. Hey, how about step out and talk with me for a minute?" And somewhere in there, I don't remember exactly, but when I found out that my mom was dead, that she had committed suicide. Everything around that point is how things transpired, the story I was told on how it happened and everything like that, is kind of a blur. I remember what I was told. I remember that, very intimately. It's one of them facts I'm not going to share here, but I remember that very well. And at some point, I remember telling myself, okay, there's nothing else I can do right now. There's work that needs to get done, and I need to do it. And as soon as I had the opportunity, I was able to get inside the house and get Mama's little book where she kept all the phone numbers and addresses of family and things like that. And I started making phone calls and started, letting people know that needed to know what was going on. And I can't even tell you what time of night it was. I remember that the fog had set in. They had a flagpole in the front yard with a light shining up on the flag, little flower garden around the flagpole. And I remember you couldn't even see the flag. You could just see the glow from the light that was shining up on it. It was real thick fog. I mean, in all honesty, it was pretty fitting, at least for my typical mindset. Afterwards, I remember, people telling me that when I switched my emotions over to trying to get things done, that people actually got a little concerned about me because I flipped the switch that quick. And it wasn't so much of a conscious thing, looking back on it now with the knowledge that I've got now. It was, I had to do something. I had to do something because I'm a big guy, and not being able to control my emotions would have most certainly have landed me in some trouble. I think everybody would have been understanding of it, but I would have definitely had some things I would have had to have answered for when it was done. So, we finish up what needs to be done there at the house, and had to go home. So I went back home, and the next few days are kind of blurry to me. I know we made arrangements and did things that needed to be done. And then eventually we had the service. And after that, it was the business of what needed to be done to handle everything was over. So I didn't know what to do after that. I didn't have anything to occupy my mind. Didn't really have a job to go to because I was self-employed at the time. My brother and I had a general contracting business. I think we had split the business at that point and I was on my own, but I was self-employed. And I think I had one open job at the time. It was a small one, and I had contacted the customer and explained what was going on. And they were very kind and allowing me to process what I needed to. But I didn't have anything to busy my mind. So all I had time to do was think about everything. Think about how I was raised. Think about the conversations that me and Mama had. Think about the fact that she said that, people that committed suicide were cowards. And my mama wasn't a coward. She wasn't. I knew her. And a lot of things went through my mind, but it got to the point, and it didn't take long. It was a very rapid progression to where I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep, not just because, I was upset, but every time I closed my eyes, I would see my mama's face. And every time I saw her face, it broke my heart because I knew I'd never see her again, at least not how I wanted to. I would never be able to give her a hug. I would never, I'd never get to hear her tell me that she loves me anymore. It was a lot, even now, all these years later, it's still a lot. It's still a lot to process. Excuse me. One of the things that constantly played through my mind was that phone call and hearing her voice and, knowing something was wrong. And even now, I still have guilt for that phone call. I told myself then, and my rational mind tells me otherwise, but I told myself then that I didn't try hard enough, that I knew something was wrong and I didn't try hard enough. And if I would have tried harder, then my mama would still be here. Rationally, logically, that's not the case. Logically speaking, if someone wants to commit suicide, if that's what they've made up their mind to do, then that's what they're going to do. You may be able to postpone it. You may be able to try to get them some help, try to pull them back from the edge. But realistically, if someone has made that decision, that's what they're going to do. It's not saying that they can't be brought back from the ledge and get help. By no means is that what I'm saying. And by no means am I saying don't try to help them. But if I call it being at the bottom of the pit. If they're that far down in the pit to where they can no longer see any light and they can't get some light quick, they're going to do it. And that's just the simple reality of it. And even though I was Mama's baby boy, even though she had just heard my voice, probably 30 minutes earlier, that wasn't enough. Telling me she would talk to me later wasn't enough. And Mama wasn't one, obviously, to lay her burdens on me. That's not what she did. Otherwise, I would have known that she was, going through some stuff. So logically and realistically, there's nothing I could have done to prevent what was happening that night, what happened that night. There's nothing I could have done. My emotions on the other hand, tell me something completely different. Had I pushed a little harder, had I tried a little more, and now being in the profession that I am and have done it for so long and have dealt with these situations so many times before, it doesn't really help a whole lot, because now, I've got more experience in dealing with it, and I'm sitting here thinking, why didn't I know this stuff back then? It wasn't in the cards for me to know, but that's what my mind tells me. So, like I said, it was a rapid progression from, simply doing things and grieving to being traumatized about it. It literally changed my entire thought process on the way I see the world. This traumatic grief lasted for around 3 months. And in that 3 months, it wasn't, just, moping around. My personal business, my company that I'd started, that I'd had going for a little over a year at that point, I completely let it fall apart. I finished the one project for the customer that I had, and that was it. I had no passion to go out and go back to work. Obviously, with not sleeping, that wasn't helping anything. I legitimately was not sleeping. I may go to sleep for 20 or so minutes, and then I was back up. And it was to the point, as far as my sleeping goes, it was to the point of my wife and my mother-in-law taking turns sitting up with me, because they didn't know what to do to help me. And I wasn't talking to anybody. I wasn't expressing anything. When I did, it wasn't much. They just knew I wasn't sleeping. We tried to have a normal life, but it wasn't happening for me. I couldn't see it. And it wasn't until I finally broke down and decided to go to the VA, and went in and got an appointment, went in with a doctor, explained to my doctor what was going on, and was walked immediately down the hall to a therapist, and sat in with the therapist. And I don't remember how long I was in there, but I was told by the therapist that, no, it wasn't depression, but I was grieving. And the biggest reason why I was not able to move past it was because I wasn't sleeping. Makes sense now. At the time, it didn't make any sense, because, well, if all I needed was sleep, then I would just sleep. So the doc prescribed me some meds so that I could get some sleep. And I went home and I started taking the medication so I could get some rest. And I was able to start processing things then. But even once I was able to start processing and moving through the grief, it still had a lasting effect on my life. When I tell you that it changed the way I see the world, I'm in it. It completely flipped my world upside down. Everything that I knew that I could count on was no longer there. The world was completely different now. I'd never experienced someone that had committed suicide. I'd never once, even though I knew one day, my mom would die, I never once considered that I would be in my early 20s when that happened. Never once. I think I was 24, maybe 24, 23, 24 years old when my mom died. Never in a million years would I thought that I would have lost my mom that early. She was 50 years old. 50 years old, and she was gone. So all of a sudden now, I'm seeing the world completely different, even to the point when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. We spoke and had many conversations, and my dad promised me, he said, "Son, I will fight it as long as I can." He said, I'm not going to leave you like that. And I believe my dad. My dad was an honorable man. He was a man of his word. In my eyes, my dad was a man's man. But even with that reassurance from him, to me, it was any day Daddy was going to go take himself out. All of a sudden the world was no longer such a bright place. It was a lot darker. And even to this day, I still view things like I did then. Because that night, the rose-colored glasses were ripped off of my face. And it took a while. It took a while for me to get through it. And the funny thing, it's not funny, but the thing about grief is what worked for me in getting through it may not be what's going to work with everybody else. With me, I needed sleep so that I could begin to process. Once I started that, it was opening up and talking to the people I love about what I was going through. Talk to them about how I was feeling. At one point, I was doing some work for my stepdad to earn money, and it was out at the property. And one of the things that I had such a hard time doing was, he's off doing his job in construction, and I'm there at the property by myself. And I would look back towards the front porch of the house where Mama always sat. And Mama was always there. Mama always sat in the same chair all the time. When she wasn't in the office doing work, she would sit in that chair. She wasn't one for really sitting around inside the house. At least then, she wasn't one to sit around inside the house. She was always doing something. So every time I looked back at the porch, I expected to see Mama there, and she wasn't. And at the time, I'm out there on the property doing work by myself. So there was literally no one else. So I would look back at the porch expecting to see Mama, knowing she wasn't going to be there. And it would break my heart every single time I look back. And I was having to deal with that. I was going home and telling my wife about it. Today I broke down. I looked back at the house and I really wanted to see Mama on the porch, and she wasn't there. And I know she wasn't going to be there, but it doesn't change anything. It was talking, it was working, it was trying to occupy my mind with something other than constantly thinking about it. And eventually I was able to start moving forward and returning to my new normal. And I say it that way because when you lose someone you love, especially in such a traumatic way, there is no normal anymore. With Mama, she was such a big part of my life. There is no normal without that. So you have to make a new normal. And that new normal for me didn't include Mama. And it wasn't until I got into my current profession where I was actually able to really come around with everything. I'd worked a couple of calls, but when I was a rookie, there was a particular call where it was a suicide, and I wound up eventually standing on the perimeter holding the crime scene log, and I wound up talking with the family members, and I was able to at least understand what they were going through, because this was traumatic to them. They weren't expecting it, but I was able to understand what they were going through. And because I'm holding the crime scene and I'm literally the crime scene log and I'm literally just standing there, it gave us the opportunity to talk and to share. And they began asking questions about what to expect. And, I had to say to them, what happened with me may not happen for you. What worked for me may not work for you. But I was able to share my experience with them. And that started to happen more and more. The individuals I work with that have worked with me, for a good period of time, they've heard me tell the story of my mama many times, or some variation thereof, or of another family member. So I've been able to use those traumatic events in my life to try to help others. And that has been a huge help for me. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it go away. But it allows me to try to have some kind of positivity out of the loss of my mom. I'm able to try to do some good with that trauma and with what I went through. And that helps. I'll never forget that night. I will never forget what I went through and the emotions that I felt. Just sitting here trying to tell y'all about it now, something that's, deeply personal to me, it still chokes me up. But if it can help, it's worth it. If going back through it and reliving those emotions and reliving those feelings and still seeing those images in my mind can help, then it's worth it. The biggest thing in dealing with grief, and especially traumatic grief, is give yourself some time. You're not going to get over it overnight. You have to give yourself some time. There's no set time frame on when your brain and your emotions are able to process everything. There's no set time on how long it's going to take you to get over it. I have a coworker of mine who lost a child, and the statement was made towards this coworker, not in his presence, but towards this coworker, the phrase was something similar to the effect of, well, it's been long enough and he needs to get over it. I don't know who thinks they have the right to dictate that for anybody. Especially in that particular person's situation. It wasn't a longtime friend. It wasn't, a sibling. It was way more intimate than that. And for someone to be so cold and callous to say, well, it's been long enough, they need to get over it. It doesn't sit right with me. As someone who has dealt with traumatic grief in my past, and I know what I went through with it. Didn't set right with me at all. I'd had conversations with this particular individual, and we all process it differently. There's no time frame on it, and you got to give yourself a break. Give yourself a break in dealing with it. You're going to have emotions over it, and you need to let yourself feel those emotions. You don't have to let it be out in public, and even if you don't want to do it with your significant other, you have to let yourself feel those emotions. If it's welling up inside of you and you need to let it out, then let it out, because bottling it up doesn't do anything. It only makes the trauma worse, because now you feel like you can't even have a break from the grief. So give yourself a break. Give yourself some time. Give yourself a break. And I can't encourage it enough. Talk to somebody. Whether it's a significant other, whether it's a best friend, whether it's, someone that you can confide in, whether it's someone with your church, someone with clergy, go to therapy. They're an independent party. They have no emotion one way or the other towards how you feel. The only thing they're concerned with is helping you. They're a third party in the whole situation. Go talk with them. I hate the stigma that surrounds therapy. There's a huge stigma that surrounds therapy, especially for those of us that are in the public safety work or any type of work where you're expected to be fearless. The boldest of the individuals, the most courageous of the individuals. The stuff we all have to deal with, it takes a toll on you. And even if you're not in one of those professions, even if you're, the general person that's, working a regular 9-to-5 job, we all go through things. And the stigma that's around, mental health, the stigma that's around seeking therapy, it's got to stop. It's got to stop at some point. I've told people before, it's okay to not be okay. It really is. If there's somebody I work with that's going through some stuff, and I know they're going through some stuff, and I know they're not okay, it doesn't make me trust them any less. It makes me want to help them more. If in my job, if I have to go do something dangerous, I'm obviously going to make sure their head's squared away enough to be able to do it if we're there, but I'm not going to shun them for it, because it's okay to not be okay. Everybody deals with crap. Everybody has to deal with crap. How we deal with it is different. Everybody's resiliency is different. How you were raised, what you went through in life, what your upbringing taught you. All of those things build our resiliency. And if you've never been through traumatic situations, you may not be ready to handle those things, and that's okay. Hopefully less people have to go through those kind of things, but I know the world we live in, and that's just not going to be the case. So we've got to get rid of the stigma that follows this stuff. If you're somebody that's dealing with it, reach out to somebody. If it's not a professional, make sure whoever you're talking to is somebody that's got a sound mind, that's going to be there just to listen. You don't always need advice. Sometimes you just need to get it off your chest. Sometimes you just need to hear the words come out of your mouth yourself. Because sometimes hearing them come out of your mouth helps them be real and helps you process. Everything else, it's a crapshoot. What's going to work, what's not going to work. You know, I can't say it enough. What works for me may not work for you. It might. I don't know. And there's no way for me to know. But the biggest things are giving yourself some time and give yourself a break. It's okay that you're not okay. It's okay that you're hurting. Give yourself a break. Quit being so hard on yourself. Quit telling yourself, I need to get over this because I've got to do such and such. You're hurting. And that's okay. Manage it. Work with it. Feel it. Feel your emotions and process them. So, guys, that's about all I got. As always, I appreciate your time. Hope I didn't drag on too long, but this one was one that was a little bit closer to home for me. If you are somebody that's dealing with traumatic grief, grieving in general, or dealing with anything, reach out to somebody. You can always reach out to me. You know, I'm by no means am I a professional, and I speak only from my experiences and what training and knowledge I do have. But reach out to somebody. You don't have to do it alone, and you're not the only one going through it. So reach out. Okay? I appreciate y'all's time, and until the next time, stay safe. See you around.